eat his flesh. Written and narrated by Lady Spookaria. I have found myself wondering whether I should share this with anyone. I found my grandmother's journal last week. It had been stored in the attic during the move to her new home. I'd gone over there to help her organize her things and to clean. I've always wanted to learn more about my family history. The book was leather-bound, written in cursive, and was pretty thick. She wrote in it regularly throughout her life. The paper was slightly different when new sections had been added. I settled down to read it one day. It started when she was 9 years old. She spoke about her family, my great-grandparents and her siblings. It was pretty interesting to hear how she lived. She mentioned a friend of hers, her best friend, a small boy who lived across the street called Peter. Peter and her would frequently play together. It was pretty sweet. As I read, she wrote about her dreams and the rise of World War II, a war she lost both her father and her brother. She talked about the rationing, the bombs, and the stress of invasion. Yet, Peter remained consistent. I was curious as to why Peter was not called in to serve in either of the world wars. She didn't say. He was a regular feature in her writing. Otherwise, her childhood was quite unimpressive, so I'll skip to her teenage years. At first, I wondered whether or not Peter was a childhood ghost. A best friend, but it sounded like he aged as she did. She told me he grew tall and handsome. I felt a little strange reading this, and I knew I had no right to be. My grandfather's name was James, and I think she had a bit of a crush on Peter. She mentioned how her mother didn't approve of Peter, and by all accounts, I couldn't see the reason why. On the 13th of July, 1950, she began to have nightmares of a person watching outside her bedroom window. As I flicked through the pages, I noticed it was recurring, and kept happening again and again. Each time, the figure became more and more clear. A black shadow with glowing eyes. When she spoke about it, her family told her to be quiet. There were many people in pain after the war ended, and life was returning to normal. They figured it was just a nightmare. When I turned the page, I saw the drawing of the figure. The eyes stared up at me, and I instantly began to feel uneasy. I kept reading more about Peter and my grandmother. They went on several dates and were courting, essentially dating with marriage in mind, so to speak. I couldn't read her journal one night and needed some time to rest. I placed a bookmark inside, lay down in bed, and turned on some relaxing music to fall asleep to, and began to flick through my phone. I liked a few pictures, commented on a few things, when I noticed a reflection. It happened so briefly. There was a black shadow. When I blinked, it was gone. I laughed to myself and decided it was definitely time for bed. I curled up and slept. I found myself in an empty room. The white paint was peeling off the walls, and the door slammed shut behind me. I jumped, looked around, and thought I could see the shadow figure. Instead, I saw Peter. Exactly as my grandmother had drawn and described him. He stared at me, unblinking. There was a stillness about him that frightened me. He said nothing, and I stepped backwards. That feeling would not disappear. I could see my breath, and I shivered in the cold. When I looked for the door, I discovered it was gone. I turned around and looked for Peter. half expecting him to be standing behind me, but he wasn't there. I was still trapped inside the doorless and windowless room. I shivered and ran my fingers along the surface of the wall, trying to find a way out. As my pace increased, I felt my heart rate rise, and I started to scratch at the wall, trying to find a way out. I needed to get out. I could feel eyes on me in the darkness, and I needed to get away from whatever it was. Please, please, I begged to myself. I felt a breath on the back of my neck. My scratching became louder. I could feel both the wallpaper and my fingernails peel away. I felt fingers moving through my hair. I tried to scream and no sound came out. I kept imagining the shadow figure behind me, ready to grab me and hurt me. You need to run. A voice came from the opposite end of the room. I looked in the direction and saw an open window, the night sky bright and the moon illuminating the room. I turned and ran, not looking back into the dark, and leapt out the window. I felt my body fall through the air, and when I was about to land, I woke up in my bed, breathless and coated in sweat. It was nothing but a nightmare. I got up, showered and brushed my teeth before checking the dark circles under my eyes. They were darker than they usually were. I leaned in close to study my eyes. Something about them looked different. I decided to ignore it for the time being, got dressed and brushed my hair. All I could think about was continuing to read my grandmother's journal. I kept thinking about Peter, the nightmare I had, and I found myself drawn to it. I opened it, lifted the bookmark, and started to read again. My grandmother wrote that Peter would come over to her house at all hours of the day or night. That, on the odd occasion, she would see him standing inside her room, staring at her from the corner, silent and unmoving. I felt a feeling of dread. Why was I now seeing him? I kept reading, and surprisingly the next few paragraphs were relatively quiet, uneventful. She met my grandfather, James, and only considered him to be a friend. As I kept reading, my eyes were drawn to the corners of the room, and I had a feeling I was being watched. My vision began to blur, and I could barely focus on the words in front of me. I kept hearing whispers around me. Eat him, eat him, eat him, eat him, eat his flesh. They went on for a long while. The shadow with the glowing eyes kept watching me, circling, and I wondered just how my grandmother had managed to escape. I opened my eyes and saw Peter, exactly like his photograph, exactly like how she had drawn him. He smiled at me. His face perfect, too perfect, and without any blemishment or sign of suffering. He didn't even look real. Eat him, eat his flesh, eat his flesh, eat his flesh, eat his flesh, eat him. I reached out and placed my hands on either side of his cold cheeks, frozen to my touch, and leaned forward. My teeth sank into his skin, and he screeched in surprise. As I pulled away, I could taste the blood and the flesh. I chewed the raw meat, swallowed, and went in for the next bite. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. He didn't pull away. A feeble stop was all he muttered, and I continued to eat my fill. I gorged myself, my stomach bloated, and soon fell into a dreamless sleep. When I woke up, I could feel something in my teeth, and could taste the distinctive metal taste of blood. I opened my bedroom door to see my grandmother standing there. She pulled me into a loving hug and I accepted it. I was confused. I didn't hear her come in. "Welcome to the family, darling," she whispered into my ear. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to stab or caress the like button, comment, share the video, and subscribe if you haven't already. This video is made with the support of my incredible Patreons, channel members, and tippers. All support is greatly appreciated. Don't forget to check out my merch and follow me on all my socials. Links down below. Stay safe, my little spooklings. And remember, I'll be watching you.